Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched West Side Story. Let's talk about it. So West Side Story is directed by Steven Spielberg. He seems to be some kind of indie up-and-coming director. Personally, I've never heard of him, but it seems as though he's making inroads in Hollywood, and like, good for him. Like, you're never too old to get started, right? Anyways, it is directed by Steven Spielberg, and it is of course a remake of the 1961 classic, the musical classic of the same name, which itself was an adaptation of the 1957 hit Broadway musical. A West Side Story is pretty much a reimagining of the exact same story that we got in 1961, where we have these two gangs, the Jets and the Sharks, and they are respectively populated by like Irish American, white Americans versus the Puerto Rican immigrants who are living in New York. And the Jets see the Puerto Ricans as sort of invaders in their territory, which is kind of like a metaphor for how immigrants are seen in terms of how they move into places, and the natives, the quote-unquote natives, see them as invaders in the territory, the neighborhoods that they live in. But they're fighting over this turf, even though it's established at the very beginning of the film that this turf is like meaningless. In a matter of years, it's all going to be bulldozed over anyways in favor of building these fancy apartments for the rich upper class. So this story delves into this kind of, hot-blooded rivalry between the Jets and the Sharks, whilst at the same time commenting on the underlying issues, the socio-political issues at play here, and the futility of all of this violence. When you consider all of these deep, important themes at play here, especially with the representation of Puerto Ricans in New York, the 1961 movie was very much ahead of its time in a lot of ways. I mean, these are really important issues that we can relate to today. And so the fact that the film from 1961 portrayed these issues and delved into these themes and this commentary is really impressive. Now, I will say I did watch the 1961 movie basically for the first time this past week. The real first time that I watched it was in like year 7, and it was part of like a music class. It was one of those free days where we were just sitting around watching a movie, but that doesn't really count because like people were talking, and like we were sitting down in the middle of the class and there were some tall people in front of me, like I couldn't see what was going on. And also, even though the teacher told us to like roll down the blinds, there would always be that like crack of sunlight that would escape through the blinds, and they would hit the projector and you wouldn't be able to see anything on screen anyways. So like that doesn't count. That doesn't count, okay? And plus the class wasn't long enough for us to watch the whole film, whatever. That doesn't count. I watched it for the first time this past week, and I did see that even though those themes being explored in a film from 1961 is very impressive, it doesn't really delve into those themes with any real depth. Like, honestly, it's pretty surface level in terms of its commentary on these important issues. And so for me, considering how iconic the 1961 movie is, considering how much of a classic it is, I mean, this film won 10 Academy Awards, including the award for Best Picture. Considering how substantial this film is in terms of its legacy within this genre of film, I think the only way you can really justify a remake of this film is to have an angle, to have something different to say, something that is more in line with what we can offer in the 21st century. But surprisingly, this Steven Spielberg, surprisingly, okay, this indie director decided to just go ahead and remake West Side Story and set it once again in the like 1950s era. Whereas I would have thought it would make sense to kind of bring this story in the modern day and maybe delve into these themes that the original film explored in a little bit more depth. But this is basically just a rehash of the 1961 movie with a sprinkling of more favorable 21st century sensibilities. If you were hoping that this new West Side Story would take advantage of the fact that the discourse surrounding immigration and, you know, the experiences of immigrants have been more and more documented in media, in social media as well as more representation in media and in film over the course of the 60 years since the original West Side Story came out. Like, if you think that this movie would take that on board and actually, you know, envelop that into the storytelling of this new version of this story, you are wrong. You are sadly mistaken, because really these really important and interesting themes that are explored in the 1961 film are basically treated with the same weight in this 2021 version. And another thing that this film pretty much just rehashes are the musical numbers. Now here's the thing. In this case, I would not expect Steven Spielberg, this obscure director, this obscure indie director, I would not expect him, okay, to try tackling this new version of West Side Story by dumping all of these iconic musical numbers and trying something different. Absolutely not. Absolutely not, okay? I knew the second that it was going to be set in the same time period as the original film that we would need these iconic musical numbers. I need America. I needed America to be note perfect. And you know what it was? You know what it absolutely was? Oh my god. First of all, Ariana DeBose, or is it DeBose? I'm not sure how you pronounce her name, but she was phenomenal as Anita. We'll talk about the individual performances in a second, but her performance during the America sequence, like, that's what I was waiting for. That's what I was waiting, because that is the song that I associate West Side Story with the most. There were a few classic songs in here that I didn't even realize was from West Side Story, but America had to be note perfect, and it was. It absolutely was. I first of all really appreciated the fact that this film takes advantage of the fact that it is a film rather than a stage musical. That's something that I've talked about a lot, especially in relation to musicals that have come out in the last year. But I do understand that, you know, there are stage musicals, and when they're adapted into film, some directors want them to still feel like a stage musical for whatever reason. I disagree with this. If you are directing a film, make it feel like a film. Take advantage of the fact that you can move to different sets in a way that you can't when you're on stage, when you're restricted to those three walls. I like the fact that Steven Spielberg, this, you know, awesome new director that we're hearing about, I like the fact that he made use of the different settings. You have this kind of movement that wasn't there in the original 1961 movie. They were on a rooftop during the America sequence, and that was fun. That, like, the back and forth was excellent there, don't get me wrong, but here we're able to, like, move through the streets. We're able to move through the streets. It was like a whole movement, and we were also able to see more of, like, the environment. We're able to see more of the neighborhood in this film, just in general, aside from this musical sequence. I do think that the musical sequences very much benefited from this, like, enhanced movements, from this kind of feeling that you're being guided through the neighborhood. And of course, when it comes to the musical numbers, what we're looking out for is the singing. Brilliant singing, okay, but even more so the dancing. The dancing in this film was insane. I was watching these dance sequences thinking, like, I'm a human too. Like, they're humans and I'm a human. Where's the disconnect? Why can't I do that? Why can't I do what they're doing on screen? Ariana, who portrays Anita, as I said, was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And then of course you have her dance partner David Alvarez, who portrays Bernardo. Them together was just fire, flames. Like, it was absolutely insane. These dance sequences were just perfection, absolute perfection. You could tell that they rehearsed the hell out of every single second, and it paid off because it looked wonderful. So yeah, the musical numbers were great, the singing was awesome. awesome, but the dance sequences even more so. And I think the setup of the musical numbers was even more impressive this time around because they felt more dynamic. In terms of my favorite musical numbers, I would say 100% America has to be right up there at the very top. And then you also have I Feel Pretty. I didn't realize that I Feel Pretty came from this film. I didn't realize that it came from West Side Story. Like, for some reason in my brain, I thought that it came from Sound of Music. Like, I just had imagined that Julie Andrews had sang that song, but no, it comes from West Side Story. They did change the order of some of these musical numbers, or rather they changed the placement of them, and I do feel like the placement of I Feel Pretty was interesting here because it actually takes place after the rumble, after the fight, where you have this musical number where she's talking about how pretty she feels and she's in love and everything. And I think on the one hand it kind of works because we know as the audience what's just happened at the rumble and she doesn't realize that yet, so she's still on this high, like she's still on cloud 9 thinking that she's, you know, gonna be with the love of her life, but in reality we know what's just transpired. So I think in that sense it works, but then on the other hand I think it kind of is a bit jarring to have this very emotionally impactful moment where these two boys end up dying, and it's very somber and it's very upsetting, and then we jump to this musical sequence where she's talking about how pretty she feels. Like, it could read as a little bit insensitive even though she doesn't realize what's just happened. Then another favorite of mine was Tonight, where they were like preparing for the rumble. I think that was a really cool song, seeing all of these different characters pitch into this song but from all of their different angles. I think it was really cool. And then of course you have the rumble scene, and I think it leads up to that moment really well. I also did enjoy, is it Cool Down? That song that Riff sings with Tony, where they're like, oh, just calm down. Tony has the gun and they're just kind of dancing and hopping around these holes in the woodwork. I thought that was a really cool song. The only thing I would say about that, and we'll talk about it a bit more when it comes to the performances, is that the actor portraying Riff was so clearly a much better dancer than Ansel Elgort that it was a little bit distracting because I kept looking at him and I was like, man, he's an incredible dancer. And Ansel Elgort was like trying, and like he was doing a pretty good job, but like he wasn't the other guy. Like, it was awkward. Okay, so speaking of the cast themselves, here we have a cast that was asked to basically do the impossible in recapturing the magic that the cast had from the original 1961 film. Now, here's the thing about the original cast of that movie though, something that I didn't realize until I watched this film pretty much for the first time, as I said, this past week. The brown face. What? Why did no one tell me that there's brown face in this film? I needed a warning. I needed someone to let me know beforehand because I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for the brown face. At first I was like, am I crazy? Or maybe it's the like 1960s lighting. Maybe it's the hair and makeup department giving them fake tans because the lights would have made them too pale. I don't know. I don't know. But then as the film went on, I was like, who am I kidding? I'm looking at Caucasian people wearing brown faces. What is going on? And in the case of Rita Moreno, like, she was literally darkened to make her look more like Hispanic, I guess, make her look more exotic. But like that's just, it was shocking to me. Like, I don't feel like enough people mention this when they're discussing West Side Story. Like, it really can't be understated how shocking it is to see like the half the cast in brown face. Like, people always point out like the yellow face in like James Bond, or, you know, occasions like that, My Fair Lady, or is it Breakfast at Tiffany's, one of them, but no one talks about West Side Story. Are you kidding me? That's half the cast. That's literally half the cast. As I said before, in a lot of ways this film was very ahead of its time because of its exploration of the immigrant experience in the US, and having these, you know, Puerto Rican characters at the forefront of the story was pretty novel at that time, but they kind of lose a little bit of that respect in my eyes, a little bit of that achievement, the shine of that achievement, because they didn't actually have the guts to hire Puerto Rican actors or like Latino actors. Like, what's the point? Although I will say it was pretty vindicating that Rita Moreno ended up winning the Academy Award, because she is basically the only Puerto Rican actress in that film. Okay, so now let's get into this modern cast that they chose to represent these classic characters. First of all, we have Rachel Zegler, who portrays Maria. Now, she is a newcomer to the big screen, as I understand it. I think she did a really great job in this role. I think it's a pretty thankless role, in my opinion, because Maria and Tony's love story is one of my least favorite parts of West Side Story. I just don't care for it. You know, I understand that it's another adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, these kind of star-crossed lovers that are forbidden from being together. I understand that part, but I always found, you know, Maria and Tony's connection to be lackluster in the original West Side Story. Here it is enhanced, like you are a little bit more convinced that they are like these star-crossed lovers and they are, you know, instantly in love with each other when they meet, but it's still like a very tough pill to swallow for me. It's still a very tough pill to swallow, but she is supposed to be this like dainty, innocent, super religious, quiet Latina girl, and I kind of understand where Bernardo is coming from when he has this kind of vicious ferocity towards Tony, where, you know, it's for numerous reasons that have nothing to do with Maria, honestly, but he does make a valid point when he tells Tony that like he just came out of prison and now he's found himself a brown girl to fall in love with, and she's all innocent and pure, and he's hoping that by being associated with her he'll also be more innocent and pure despite the sins of his past. Like, I understood that point. I think Bernardo made some points there, okay? That's basically what Maria exemplifies, and you have that juxtaposition between the two. It's supposed to be this kind of opposites attract situation, although that's never really resonated with the character of Tony because he's never been an out and out bad boy in both iterations. But anyway, in the case of Rachel's performance, I think she does a great job with this role. I think she really sells being, you know, innocent and in love with Tony, and I also think, you know, where she really excels is in her vocal performance. Her voice is angelic, her voice is stunning, and you can tell that she, you know, has this kind of theatre background, especially when she has these duets with Ansel Elgort, because it's like Ansel is trying but she's succeeding. Like, she's excelling. And also, as a side note, another thing about the Maria character, listen, I can forgive the fact that she fell in love with Tony, you know, upon first seeing him. It was love at first sight, as it were. I can forgive that. I'm still annoyed, but I can forgive it. I can even forgive the fact that she was still in love with him even after finding out he was a convict fresh out of prison. There's nothing wrong with being in love with a convict, I guess, but they had met the day before. They had met, like, at that point, aren't you thinking like, maybe I'm rushing into things? Like, maybe you don't want to break things off, but maybe slow things down because you don't really know this person. Like, he was in prison for a violent crime. Maybe we take our time with this, okay? Maybe we don't have wedding plans in mind after a day of being together, but, you know, fine, I can kind of forgive that as well. Maybe, not really, but the part that I just don't understand, the part that I feel like everyone just needs to stop and like consider, like really think about for a second here, and by everyone I mean Maria, is the part where Tony literally killed her brother. He killed her brother. He killed her brother. If that's not a turn off, I don't know what is. Like, I don't care what Tony looks like. I don't care if he's Ansel Elgort. I don't care. Okay, he killed her brother. That's the end of the story. That's the end. That's the end of this love story. I don't understand why she's still saying, oh, but I love him. What? How? How do you love it? That's why, like, Anita was like, what are you talking about? Like, you dumb girl. And honestly, yeah, you dumb girl. How are you still in love with him? He killed your brother. That would be like an off switch to me. That would be That would be the trigger to be like, oh, it's over. Like, already there were warning signs, already there were red flags, but now he killed her brother, he flicked the switch, we're done, that's it, he's dead to me now. But no, we have no common sense. Okay, so next up we have Tony himself, and I've pretty much said most of my thoughts on Ansel Elgort's performance here. Obviously there was a little bit of controversy going into this film because of Ansel Elgort's like private situation and the fact that he was cancelled. That was unfortunate. Like, I really wish that someone else had been attached to this project in light of what came out about him, and it was kind of tough at the beginning to watch him on screen because the whole time I was thinking like, you know, like, you don't want that in your project, you don't want that in your film, but you know, these actors be acting up. Anyways, so aside from that, just looking at his performance in this film, I thought he was really good as Tony. Like I said, I think he tried his best to do the singing and the dancing, even though it doesn't seem like he has an extensive background in Broadway or in theatre, and he obviously didn't quite match up to the actors and the performers who do have that extensive background, who are portraying the supporting roles. But again, I do feel like Ansel Elgort sold the love that Tony had for Maria, the kind of, you know, starstruck love that he had for her. It was very fast, it was very passionate, it didn't make a lot of sense, but you know, fine, they're in love. He just seemed like someone who, you know, he had this dark past, he was trying his best to move away from that. He was also triggered very easily and killed his new girlfriend's brother, but whatever. He was trying. Yeah, I do think that Ansel Elgort was really good, but in light of the fact that he is kind of cancelled, I think it's a shame that he was hired when in reality there's probably a ton of like Broadway actors who would have been able to do the singing and the dancing and, you know, the acting as well, but at the same time they're not cancelled, so like they're much more enjoyable to watch on screen. Or even actors that like do have a background in theatre, like what, Tom Holland. Oh my goodness. Why wasn't Tom Holland in this? I think he would have been perfect, like in light of the fact that he does have a bit of a background in the theatre playing like Billy Elliot. He's, you know, a really good dancer. He's playing Fred Astaire, I believe, that was announced last week, so I think he would have been great in the role of Tony. Actually, he can do an American accent. Perhaps he would have looked a little too similar to Biff. Like he does look a little bit similar to Biff, and it would have been tougher to kind of sell the idea that he has this storied history of being super violent and aggressive and like a monster. So yeah, maybe that would have been an issue, although you could have just solved that by having Tony and Riff be biologically related, because the actor who portrays Riff, Mike Feist, he looks very similar to Tom Holland, so it would be convincing. I also think in general, when it comes to the character of Tony, this version of the film hammers home the idea that he did have a dark past, that he was a very violent person who has this kind of reputation amongst the Jets. I still don't think that reputation feels very convincing. I don't think he feels as dangerous as some of the other supporting characters, but still it does a better job of trying to convince us that Tony has very much changed since coming out of prison than the original film, where Tony was just a wet blanket from start to finish. And next up we have arguably the most important role in this entire film, and that is the role of Anita, who is this time around portrayed by Ariana DeBose, and I think she does a splendid job here as well. This is a very important role, as I said, because of course, you know, Rita Moreno actually won the Academy Award for her performance in the original 1961 film portraying this character. So I think Ariana had some big shoes to fill, but she definitely stepped up to the plate, especially when it came to her dancing. What? Her dancing was insane. Her dancing was incredible, but even like her performance, you know, delivering on those emotional beats, especially after the death of Bernardo, I think she was really convincing there, and establishing her friendship and her love for Maria, and you know, the sympathy that she had for her. But at the same time, the kind of inner conflict that Anita had when Maria was still professing her love for Tony after she'd found out that Tony had killed her brother brother and, you know, Anita's lover, Bernardo. And then we have David Alvarez as Bernardo himself. I thought he was great here. I really enjoyed his portrayal of this character. It was nice to see a Hispanic actor actually portraying Bernardo as opposed to a man in brown face. Anyways, I will say though, Bernardo is not in this film as much as he is in the original West Side Story, which is surprising. I feel like the Jets got a lot of screen time in this version, and in the original film they already had a ton of songs, so like I feel like we could have cut out one of the Jets songs easily and added in a song for the Sharks. I feel like the original film did a better job of establishing the different areas in the territories that belonged to the Sharks and belonged to the Jets, and you know exactly what they were fighting for, and the fact that it was just like corners and like alleyways and just useless land, just showing how frivolous this violence against each other really was. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have Mike Face portraying Riff. I do feel like there are times when he outshone Ansel Elgort in terms of his dancing and his singing. Like, you can tell that he is just a natural born performer in that way. I think he did a really great job of being this character of Riff, who was like really pushing Tony to, you know, go down the dark side again, you know, be down that route that he was trying to avoid, especially after he ended up in prison. Now, we also have the return of the one and only Rita Moreno, who portrays this new character called Valentine, which was really interesting. So, I mean, here we have a case where this actress who is from this iconic, legendary movie actually showed up for the remake, and I feel like it's likely because she felt like it was going to be in good hands with Steven Spielberg, this brand new director that no one's ever heard of, directing the film. And she even has a producer credit in the film itself, so it feels like she was a little bit more hands-on as opposed to just popping up for a cameo. And her character is involved, like her character acts as this elder, this respected elder in the community, and she kind of exists in this like middle ground where she married a white person, a gringo. So she does have a more favorable relationship with the Jets, but at the same time she's still Puerto Rican herself, so you know the Puerto Ricans in the area know her as such, and she speaks Spanish and everything. So yeah, she kind of exists in this middle ground, but then there are times where she clearly has to pick a side, and that is most notably seen near the very end, where we do have that sequence where Anita goes to the drugstore that Valentina now owns because her partner passed away, and she's met with like these Jets that are about to sexually assault her. Now, this is a part that I am not a fan of, okay? I don't think this needed to be repeated, mostly because it's a very traumatic incident that happens to a Latina woman, and it's not really handled with any real care, right? It's not a pivotal moment in the film that like is actually delved into with any real depth. So I feel like it's just a throwaway scene to kind of depict this horrific, traumatic thing to happen to this Latina character for no apparent reason. So we should just get rid of it. Instead, we have this sequence where Valentina kind of comes to the rescue, because these boys, even though they have clearly no respect for women whatsoever, they do respect this elder woman. She's a respected member of their community, and so they stop sexually assaulting Anita. Like, you see how that doesn't make any sense? Like, it could have been something else. They could have been throwing racial slurs at her, as they have been this whole movie, you know, calling her a Negro or whatever, because she is notably a darker skinned actress, which I appreciate, by the way. I appreciated the fact that this film had a lot more ethnic diversity in its representation of Puerto Rican people in New York. That's something that was sorely lacking in The Heights, and I think this film does a better job of showing the different hues, like the different skin tones that Puerto Rican people have, which is in large contrast to the representation that we got in the 1961 film, where they were all given the same brown paint to put on their faces. But anyways, so we could have had, you know, racial slurs. That's more expected. We didn't need a sexual assault scene, especially if it was just going to be thrown away in the next moment. And finally, I did also want to mention the character of Anybody's, who is portrayed played by Ezra Menez, and they are a gender non-conforming actor. And this is yet another element that was present in the original 1961 film that was very much ahead of its time. This idea that you have anybody who is this gender non-conforming person and people make fun of them for it, and they are mocked for, you know, not dressing like a woman even though they present as a woman, and they don't feel comfortable in those clothes. They don't relate to women in their community, but everyone is telling them to fit in that box regardless, and not really understanding or listening to what they want. And that is something that is carried on through in this film with a little bit more of a spotlight to it, not a ton more, but a little bit more, which is yet another example of the 2021 sensibilities that are sprinkled throughout this film. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving West Side Story a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on West Side Story, it's time for you guys to let me know what you think of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.